Good morning. My name's Natalie Thompson. I'm a member of the parish committee here at First Parish. What's the matter? It is on. Glad to see everybody here online, here in person, who braved the forecasts of snow, and those who are online as well. Always a special welcome to any visitors or newcomers, anyone who's trying us out. We hope you'll come back often. We invite everyone to join us downstairs after the service, or stay online if you're online for community time. And if you join us downstairs and you think it's a little dim, it's not your eyes. The lights are being worked on in the vestry to make it more energy efficient and more dimmable, but right now it's a little dim. Our mission is to build community, search for meaning, deepen our spirituality, and make a better world. If you have any questions about Unitarian Universalism or First Parish, someone from the membership team will be down at the welcome table in the vestry to greet you or answer any questions. Reverend Deborah or Kate Holland are always also around to answer questions or talk about First Parish. We're always grateful for the many people who participate to keep the service going, who prepare and come early and stay late. Their names are in the order of service. And finally, please silence your cell phones for our time together. And we'll take a moment to say hello to one another here and to those online, wherever the camera. We have new cameras, wherever they are. Now we turn our hearts and minds to worship.
Good morning. I'm Matthew Shearer, that's Joan Shearer, and while she lights our chalice, I will read these words. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers, to heal and not to harm, to help and not to hinder, to bless and not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. And now, please join me in saying our First Parish Covenant, which is in your order of service. With open minds and loving hearts, we gather to search for meaning, to care for one another, and to work together for a better world.
a wonderful way to start this morning. Thank you, James Haupt and choir. James is once again subbing for us for Polly as Polly makes her recovery. So thank you again, James. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Kate, you sound very enthusiastic this morning. Woohoo, all right. I think Kate is enthusiastic because once again, we get to explore this wonderful topic called transformation. It is our last Sunday of the month to explore this topic, and we've had quite the month, have we not? We explored the transformational power of letting go and letting in, and the transformational words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we last week talked about the transformational power of having hard conversations. I wondered, did anyone go out last week and search out a hard conversation to have? And you don't have to tell me, but yes, I see a few hands, all right. Well, today we're going to go right into the heart of transformation and explore spiritual growth, one of my very favorite topics. So to do that, I'm going to turn to one of my favorite poets, David Whyte. Perhaps you know him. This poem is called Sometimes. Sometimes, if you move carefully through the forest, breathing like the ones in the old stories, who could cross a shimmering bed of dry leaves without a sound, you come to a place whose only task is to trouble you with tiny but frightening requests conceived out of nowhere. But in this place, beginning to lead somewhere. Requests to stop what you are doing right now and to stop what you are becoming while you do it. Questions that can make or unmake a life. Questions that have patiently waited for you. Questions that have no right to go away. So may this time that we share together this morning elicit these profound questions in you, and may it serve as a time to pause so that you too can hear some of your own answers. Let's sing together, shall we? Yes, I'm going to invite you to rise in body or spirit. We're going to open with hymn 123, it's Spirit of Life. It is a very short hymn, so I'm going to ask you to get right into it and call in the Spirit into our worship this morning. Here we go.
Good morning. I'm Kate Holland, and I am the Director of Lifespan Education here at First Parish, and I use the pronoun she, her. So this morning, I have a question to start our time off. So who gets really busy and can't always stop to see what's going, and you don't pay attention and you're just so busy? Anybody do that? Never, nobody does? I know. I see someone pushing a dad's arm up. So I do that too, and sometimes Sunday mornings can be one of those days for me because there's so much to do and get ready. But my story today is about something else. It's about a little gorilla named Marvin. And Marvin wasn't like most gorillas. I mean, most gorillas want to stomp their feet and beat their chest and roar. But Marvin wasn't like that. Marvin liked to be calm and pay attention. Well, Marvin went to visit his grandfather in the city one time, and his grandfather was totally mystified. What do you mean you want to be calm? You want to look at things? And he's like, that's just the way I like to be. And he goes, you must be the king of calm. And he laughed because it was a good joke to make. I'll explain later if other people don't make it. So they decided that the first thing they would do together is they were going to go to the park. And they were kind of hungry, so they took out some bananas. And Marvin was really enjoying the bananas. He looked at how beautiful the yellow was, and even like some of the spots, the brown spots made different patterns. And then he took a bite, and it was so sweet and nice, and it had that kind of mushy kind of thing in his mouth, and it was really great. And all of a sudden, his grandfather looks over and says, I'm done. Why are you staring at your banana? And he's like, well, I just wanted to notice it and really look at it. And his grandfather's, gorillas don't get anywhere by sitting and staring at bananas. So Marvin finished his banana, and so they decided next they would go sit by the fountain. Marvin found the fountain amazing. It had little drips and drops from the fountain that made little patterns and sounds, and they were beautiful. And he looked at the water and he wondered, I wonder if it's cold or hot. And he was about to stick his fingers in to find out when a football went flying into the fountain and splashed all over Grandfather. And he's like, oh my gosh, this water is cold. And he's like, well, I know, and that wasn't great, but did you notice the fountain, how beautiful it is? And like the water, how lovely it sounds? And he's like, I noticed the water, it's all over me. He's like, but did you really? Did you really? So next they decided to take a trip on the ferry. And the ferry was so beautiful. They went out in the middle of the bay. And Marvin's grandpa pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of everything. And Marvin looked at how beautiful the water was and the ripples that the ferry was making, at the clouds and how lovely they were. And as they got off the ferry, he said, wasn't it wonderful to look at all those things? Did you look at them too? He's like, I got phone pictures of them. I certainly looked at them. He said, but did you really look at them? So that night, they decided they were going to go to a concert. It was amazing. All of the beautiful music. Marvin liked to try and listen to each tone to see if he could figure out which instrument was being played. He loved to listen to it. And he leaned over and said, Grandpa, isn't the music beautiful? And Grandpa was next to him going, he had fallen asleep. So it was hard for Marvin to kind of stay in the way that he wanted, but he continued the next day. He was like, we're going to get this down. And so the next day, they decided to go to the bakery for the breakfast. And oh my gosh, Marvin thought it smelled fabulous. He could smell the sweet smell of frosting, and it smelled a little doughy too, and it was beautiful. And Grandpa said, there's a line, I'm not gonna wait, and rushed off. So next they decided they were gonna go to a tall building to look out from the very top. And Grandpa was so excited. Finally, a place where I can stomp my feet, hit my chest, and growl. Marvin's like, oh, okay. So they go up the elevator and they reach the top of the building, and Grandpa stops for a minute and he looks at the beautiful city all around him, the shapes of the buildings and how they had different colors. He looks at the little tiny people all on the bottom rushing around and how they looked. And Grandpa looked at Marvin and he said, Marvin, I feel very calm. I think I feel like you did. And Marvin smiled and he said, that's great, Grandpa. And he said, I want to take you someplace that's very special to me. And Grandpa's like, do we have to look at bananas again? And so they went to the Museum of Art, and they looked at all of the beautiful, beautiful paintings and the colors. And there was even a banana picture that they got to look at so that they could see all the colors of that. So it was a beautiful, beautiful day, and it was lovely that Marvin and his grandpa kind of found a way to understand each other. So my question to all of you, who has something that they do to calm down? Like before, like I have my thing that I have to take some breaths before I come up here and talk to you because it makes me nervous. Anybody else have something that they do to kind of calm themselves down when they're all kind of busy? Jada? Crossword puzzles, that's an awesome thing. Anybody else have something they do to calm themselves down? Laura? Reading. Reading is good. That calms me down too. Anybody else have something they want to add? Matt Shear.
Play the guitar.
Play the guitar. Also great things. So sorry. I hope that today we'll be noticing the things around us, because even in the snow and the rain, I actually love snow. It's beautiful. I don't love shoveling it, but it's lovely when it comes down. And so I encourage all of us to take some time to listen, to look, to smell, and really appreciate the beautiful world around us. So I'm going to invite my friends to come downstairs with us to seat class, and I'm going to ask all of you to please sing us out.
Thank you, Kate. That was beautiful. In addition to supporting the many, many ministries of this congregation, our offering that we take up this morning is shared equally with the Unitarian Universalist Urban Ministry. Located in neighboring Roxbury, UUUM works across race and place to dismantle racism and white supremacy culture to advance racial, economic, and social justice. They provide shelter for individuals and families fleeing from domestic violence. They support young people at their youth development center. They provide tours of Roxbury and offer a variety of arts and humanitarian programs. Your support, both financially and by engaging with them, is greatly appreciated.
Good morning. I'm Debbie Levens, the lay minister for this congregation. This is a time in our service that we set aside to acknowledge the joys and sorrows that we all hold. In both our sharing and our witness, we affirm our covenant to care for one another. Each Sunday, we light a vigil candle in recognition of the pain and suffering being experienced around the world due to ongoing war and violence. May this small act help us unite in our prayer for the end of all suffering. We'll also light this candle to remember all those who are ill right now and cannot join us today, and hope that they recover soon. If you have a personal joy or sorrow that you'd like to share now, please feel welcome to come forward or raise your hand and I'll bring you the mic. It's not spoken. May we hold in our hearts those who have spoken, those they have named, and those we hold in silence. May it be so.
I'm going to invite us now into a time I usually call a time of centering, but this morning I'm inviting Howard Thurman to be with us, and he calls this centering down. So we are being called by the Spirit to focus right now. Hello, Spirit? Yes, what would you like? You would like them to close their eyes and relax? Okay, I have just answered the call. As you would like. Close your eyes or not. Have this moment be a time where you can bring your awareness inside. And as you probably know, Howard Thurman was an amazing preacher, an amazing writer, an amazing social justice activist. So I'd like to invite you to hear his words as you practice your time of centering this morning. Reverend Thurman says, "How good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. The streets of our minds seethe with endless traffic. Our spirits resound with clashing, with noisy silences. All the while, something deep within hungers and thirsts for the still moment and the resting law." Take a moment to take a breath, finding your resting law. He continues, "With full intensity, we seek a fresh sense of order in our living, a direction, a strong, sure purpose that will structure our confusion and bring meaning to our chaos. We look at ourselves in this waiting moment, the kinds of people we are, and the questions persist. What are we doing with our lives? What are the motives that order our days? Where are we trying to go? For what end do we make our sacrifices?" As we listen, floating up through all of the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there indeed is a sound of another kind, a deeper note which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. It moves directly to the core of our being. Our spirits are refreshed with the peace of the eternal in our step. How good it is, he says, to center down. So I'm going to invite you to take another moment, another minute, and do your own centering down. Find your inner stillness. As you feel ready, feel free to open your eyes if they've been closed. What a wonderful day to find our inner stillness. I love rainy and snowy days as a place to call us inside. I am not Keith Sims, if you are following along in the order of service. He was not able to make it today, but I would like to offer our reading. It is also from Howard Thurman. This is dated 2017. It's a piece he calls The Sound of the Genuine. There is something in every one of you that waits, listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. You are the only you that has ever lived. Your idiom is the only idiom of its kind and in all of existence. And if you cannot hear the sound of the genuine in you, you will, all of your life, spend your days on the ends of strings that someone else pulls. There is in you something that waits and listens for the sound of the genuine in yourself. And sometimes there is so much traffic going on in your mind, so many different kinds of signals, so many vast impulses floating through your organism, that you go back thousands of generations long before you were even a thought in the mind of creation, and you are buffeted by these. And in the midst of all of this, you have got to find out what your name is. Who are you? How does the sound of the genuine come through you? So ends the reading. what a beautiful prayer. All right, so I have a question for you. Gotta watch closely, okay? Now don't answer out loud. I'm going to ask you to hold your questions to the end, or your answers to the end. But is the glass half, or almost half, hold on. Is the glass half empty or half full? Note your answer. We'll come back. Hang tight. I won't drink any of it. I don't want to change your answer. So I'm going to begin with a story, one of those ancient wisdom stories. There was once a great Zen master, and each day he would offer a discourse on various subjects of spiritual life. And those that had heard him often felt that he was the wisest person they had ever heard. And again, his students would ask about the source of his wisdom. How are you so wise? They would ask. And finally, the master said, it is all written down in a book that you will inherit at my death. Well, the day finally came of the teacher's death, and the students found the book exactly where he said he would leave it. And anxiously, they opened it, and the book was blank, except for one page. And on that page was one sentence, and it read, understand the difference between the container and the content, and the fountain of wisdom shall be open to you. So, half empty or half full? Hang on to that answer. So in Unitarian Universalism, we have a wonderful container of Unitarian Universalism, and part of our content is our 7 guiding principles. Now, the third of these principles states simply that we affirm and promote, and I quote, acceptance of one another and encouragement towards spiritual growth in our congregations. Now, of course, this leads to a few questions, I imagine, like, what do we mean by spiritual growth? And for that matter, what do we, an often atheist-leaning, agnostic-leaning, humanist-leaning group of people, mean by the word spiritual? Anybody have that question? Well, I have noticed that in Unitarian Universalist circles, that word spiritual does not always get the wonderfully warm reception I'd like. So I thought it appropriate to begin this morning by turning to a respected scientist for help defining the word spiritual. Now, although there is quite a few possible sources from quite a few scientists, I particularly love this letter I found written in 1936 by Albert Einstein. He sent this letter to a 6th grade student named Phyllis Wright in an answer to a question she had sent from her Sunday school about prayer. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but first he extols the virtues of the scientific method and the power of reason. But then Einstein wrote this, and I will note that this is an English translation of the German, so he wrote approximately this. He says, everyone who is seriously engaged in the pursuit of science becomes convinced that the laws of nature exhibit the existence of a spirit vastly superior to that of men, and one in the face of which, with our modest powers, must feel humble. The pursuit of science, he continues, leads therefore to a religious or spiritual feeling of a special kind. End quote. In other words, yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. Earlier in 1930, in a 1930 essay, Einstein expressed the sentiment a little differently by writing this. He said, to sense that behind anything that can be experienced, there is something that our minds cannot grasp, whose beauty and subtlety reaches us only indirectly. This is religiousness. And he says, in this sense, and in only this sense, I am devoutly religious, or a spiritual man. Using Einstein's thought so, let's use that as a definition of spiritual or spirituality. So I'm changing it to, or adjusting it to, spirituality is the experience of or the turning toward that intangible, inexplicable force which is behind everything and which our minds cannot grasp, but that nonetheless reaches us indirectly. Does it sound like a good definition? To grow spiritually then means to allow the awareness of this force to grow in us and to change us, to nurture our ability to attune to this awareness. Now, of course, some people call this God. And if I was to use God language, which I don't usually do, that would be my definition of God. But we can call it by many, many names, and I prefer the word spirit. And although growing in our awareness of this force is named as spiritual growth in our principles, I feel the need to try to dispel at least one myth about spirituality that I see prevalent in our faith at times. And the myth is this, that spirituality and spiritual growth or spiritual practices have little utility in the, quote, real world, other than to help us feel more relaxed. Or, as the new Western misappropriation of the practice of yoga would have us believe, spiritual practices like yoga are a very good way to look good in stretchy pants. In some Unitarian Universalist circles, I have heard this misunderstanding of the importance of spiritual practices framed in this way. People have said, we do not have time for spiritual practice. There is too much work to do in the world to sit around and stare at our belly buttons. And yet so many of the great civil rights leaders, such as Howard Thurman, would surely beg to differ. In fact, Thurman felt spiritual practice was not a luxury at all, but in fact a requirement of justice work. He felt that our justice work, and indeed any engagement with the world, required for us to do that thing he calls awaken the genuine in us, so that we can be effective in what we do. To that end, to awaken and then to listen to the genuine requires that we know how, again, turning to Thurman, as he puts it, to center down, to take time in solitude, in quiet, inside ourselves, so that that which we are called to do can rise. In his poem that I read, he writes how good it is to center down, to sit quietly and see oneself pass by. But this isn't just a time to take a nap or rest. Indeed, he describes this practice of centering down as a law which will not only foster the rising of those big questions, but will help us identify our action. They will call us into action. Not unlike the opening words of David White, these questions, he proposes, hang like ripe fruit, ready for our attention and eager to be harvested. In the poem, Thurman continues, as we listen, floating up through all the jangling echoes of our turbulence, there is a sound of another kind, a deeper one which only the stillness of the heart makes clear. I think that's the important part, the rising of the sound which only the stillness of the heart can make clear. He expresses here something that we find across many, many traditions and spiritual practices, this idea that the turbulent mind must be calmed before we can truly hear our hearts. Now, I just wonder, and maybe no one in here has had this experience, but has anyone here had an experience of a turbulent mind? Once in a while? Okay. I thought maybe just one or two of you. Chatter, 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 chatter. Chatter, 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 chatter. And it's interesting that I think Thurman echoes some of the great yogic sages. Yoga Chitta Vritti Narotaha. So this is from the ancient text known as the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It was compiled about 1,600 years ago, but comes from wisdom from further back. It's the core yogic text that lays out the practice of yoga. And the word yoga is translated to mean yoke or union. So yoga is not about stretchy pants. Yoga is about merging or yoking with the intangible, inexplicable force which is behind everything. And the suggestion is that you do that by quieting the mind. So this second sutra of 196, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodhaha, it translates as yoga, the practice of yoga is the cessation of the fluctuations of the mind. So here we are thousands of years ago, right? People dealing with the exact same thing we deal with, different situations in life, but acknowledging that it's these fluctuations of the mind that cause us to draw outside of ourselves. And this text, this yogic text, goes on to explicitly describe the yogic path to quieting the mind. And interestingly enough, in the 196 Yoga Sutras, none of them describe standing on your head or twisting this way or that way. There's really only one actual posture described in the Yoga Sutras, and that's simply sitting in lotus. It's a sitting practice. Instead of standing on one's head, the scripture describes these 8 limbs of practice. Michael Singer, who's a spiritual teacher in the modern time and author of a book that I highly recommend called The Untethered Soul, speaks of this beautifully when he advises us to stop mistreating our minds. He says, imagine if your brain was a horse that you used to pull a sleigh. It would not survive long if every waking hour it was told it had to be spent pulling a heavy load. And yet that is what we do with our minds. Constant chatter, constant work. Most of our thinking, he continues, when it is not judging others. Anybody ever do that once in a while? Most of our thinking when it's not judging others is spent strategizing how we can get out of suffering of some kind. And we often move around trying to fix something internal by adjusting the external to be more comfortable. Does anybody find themselves doing that? Constantly adjusting all the things outside of us. Then I will be happy. Then. When we hold on to that chatter and constant strategizing, it's kind of like walking through a muddy field, he says. All the mud is going to stick to your boots. And if you don't clean them when you walk into your house, you're going to make a mess. I love that visual. The same happens with our inner house, he continues. If we keep bringing in the clutter, it's going to get pretty messy in there. So he's saying we need to clean the psychic debris regularly that accumulates in our minds, just like we clean our bodies of physical debris. Sitting quietly, meditating, playing the guitar, reading, sitting in service. These all can be practices of quieting the mind. And what they have in common is this quality of not grabbing hold of thoughts. Right? The Buddhist meditation teachers would say that's the core practice of meditation. Just sit. You don't have to do anything. It's what you don't do. And what you don't do is grab those thoughts that go by and wrestle them down and try to understand them. Some of the biggest chatter you will deal with in your life is the chatter of, I don't have time for this. I don't have time to meditate, to find quiet. And for this, I offer you some wisdom from a great Buddhist teacher to remember when your mind tells you that next time. He says this, he says, I meditate 1 hour every day, unless I am busy. And then I meditate 2 hours. And yet it's important to remind our UU social action spirits that spiritual practice is not a way to ignore or leave the world. In fact, it's a way to learn how to better not ignore the world. And I want to turn to one more scripture this morning, and that is the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. In the Gita, it's a story of Arjuna, who's the archer, and he's standing on this battlefield caught in indecision. He is facing a battle. He's a warrior, but the battle is with his kin, and his mind is fluctuating back and forth in a moral dilemma. What should I do? On one hand, I'm a warrior, so I should go to battle. On the other hand, those are my kin on the other side of the battlefield, and I don't want to fight them. In the Gita, Krishna, who's an incarnation of God, encourages Arjuna to act first by identifying what action is actually his to do. And Krishna says, "It is better to live your own destiny, even imperfectly, than to try to live someone else's." And when I read that, it's one of my favorite quotes from the Gita. I just think of how often I do that, how often I look outside myself to try to figure out what to do, versus just centering down, finding my genuine, and then trusting what emerges from that. There are indeed many forms of spiritual practice and many ways our spiritual lives can grow. There is a yogic saying that when you want spiritual growth as much as a drowning person wants air, you will find it. And we just have to decide that we want it and it's worth creating the time. Prioritizing our lives to give our minds the psychic bath of spiritual practice helps us turn towards that intangible, inexplicable force which is behind everything and which our minds cannot grasp, but which reaches us nonetheless indirectly. And I think we know when we have felt it. I think it's an indescribable, beautiful state. And yet it takes patience, doesn't it? It doesn't always just come. And sadly, I think patience is something our society is a little bit short of these days. Although spiritual practice can help us settle the mind and clear the clutter, we are not always gifted with the immediate bliss that comes from a good meditation. Parker Palmer, who's a Quaker teacher and author, says this. He says, "The human soul," and I think we can translate that to spirit, "the human soul doesn't want to be fixed. It simply wants to be seen and heard. The soul is like a wild animal, though, resilient and shy. When we go crashing through the woods, shouting for it to come out so we can help it, the soul will stay hidden. But if we are willing to sit quietly and wait for a while, the soul may show itself." Isn't that beautiful? Reading that, I was reminded of my daughter's experience of tickling fish. Has anybody tickled fish? When she was young, she went to this camp, and we went to pick her up. She was about 10 years old, and she was very excited. She wanted to show us something. So with great excitement, she took us over to the pond and sat us down. And then we watched as this very active 10-year-old usually knelt by the pond very quietly, took a few breaths, and then ever so slowly, like millimeter by millimeter at a time, guided her hand into the pond, really slowly. And when it finally got there, she just sat there with absolute stillness. And sure enough, soon enough, a little fish came right up, and she just tickled it. I think our spirits, our true selves, our genuine selves are like a fish in a vast pond. If we want to make contact, we must enter the waters where it lives very slowly, breathe deeply, cultivate peaceful intentions, and wait patiently. And if we are blessed, some days we too will get to tickle a fish. It's a practice. But that is why we have each other. Together we can remind each other how important it is to center down, to find the genuine, because we are here to support each other. As our congregations, I believe, become places filled with genuine people following the call of their hearts, accepting other genuine people who are following the maybe very different, but in fact surely call of their hearts, I think then our ability to really do some powerful work in the world will have no bounds. So may you find your time to center down in whatever way you do and amongst this snow and rain and each Sunday here and in your lives. And may we continue to support each other in our spiritual growth. Oh, by the way, Half full or half empty? How many people are half full? How many people are half empty? Anybody fully full? The glass is fully full, half with water and half with air. Remember, wisdom is knowing the difference between the container and the content. Let's take a moment for reflection. I don't know if it's because there's fewer of us here this morning, but it feels very calm here today, so I like that. Please join me, if you will, in the extinguishing of our chalice. The words are in your order of service if you'd like to follow along. Oops. A little sticky here. Hold that thought. There we go. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. Let's sing together one more time in your gray hymnal. I think it is 134. Did I get that right? Our world is one world. Please rise and bow to your spirit. Thank you for joining together this morning. I close with these words from Pema Chodron, a beautiful Buddhist teacher, who says, meditation practice isn't about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we already are. So may you take time this week to befriend who you are and also someone else. Go now in peace, my friends, and take peace wherever you go. Drive safely.